It's Nicolette Pomba van Zyl, editor of ESI Africa, coming to you from the East African Power Industry Convention in Nairobi. Today I'm with Job Muriuki, who is the Deputy Director of Centum Capital based here in Nairobi. Welcome, Job.
Thank you very much.
I see that you are speaking on the program this morning, looking at what financiers are looking for, and that's exactly the role that you are playing in the energy sector here in East Africa. Do you tell us about the company and the project that you are involved in?
Okay, sure. So I work for a company called Centum Investment Company Limited. It is the largest listed investment company in East Africa. We manage assets worth about $1.6 billion, of which $500 million is our own capital. About $1.1 billion is third-party capital. We're listed on the Nairobi Securities Exchange. We have 38,000 shareholders across the whole of East Africa. And we've been in existence since 1967. We are a permanent capital vehicle, and our mandate is to create investment-grade opportunities and supply them to the investing public across the region. So our job is to take greenfield risk with our balance sheet, de-risk those opportunities, and sell somebody a bankable financial asset in multiple sectors across the economy. So we do this in real estate, we're now doing this very actively in power, we do this in fast-moving consumer goods. Some of the brand names that you recognize in our portfolio are General Motors, Coca-Cola. And so we've been around for a long time, and our core focus is creating wealth by giving people well-structured projects to invest in.
I believe that you are looking at 1,200 megawatts in projects here in Kenya. What does those projects comprise of?
Okay. Yeah, sure. So we have two projects which we're currently developing. The largest of which is a coal plant, which is 1,050 megawatts, which when complete will account for a third of Kenya's power generation. The second project is smaller, but also very significant. It is a 70 megawatt geothermal power project. It is located adjacent to Kenya. And it is important because it's the first private sector greenfield geothermal development in the whole of Africa. So we'll be the first people to take a project from the stage of securing a license from the Ministry of Energy, right on the way on taking exploration drilling risk with our own capital, and thereafter building a generation plant. And that's currently what's keeping us very busy.
So on the ground, you actually have a lot of experience in bankability of projects. What is the key challenges that come up?
Yeah, I think we've been in this power business now for about 4 years. And a key lesson for us has been that sometimes as developers, you think that your key customer is a utility that is the off-taker of your power. And you forget that you have multiple customers that you need to consider along the development process, who are critical stakeholders and gates to ultimately unlock you to be able to sell the customer to the utility company only after a commercial operation date. That is when they become your customer.
Right.
So before then, your actually real customer are your investors. And your most important investor actually are the banks, because they're providing up to 75% of the capital. So the most important thing in developing projects of this scale is to understand what your customer requires. So having initial conversations with financiers in the very early stage, just to get a critical sense of what they consider bankable in your country, in the technology that you're using for a developer of your nature, is so important, and probably even more important than having the most beautiful power purchase agreement negotiated with the utility, because if it's not bankable, it's a complete waste of time.
You've mentioned geothermal.
Correct.
Geothermal can be quite risky. in terms of the drilling and finding the resource.
Yeah.
Have you found that that project has had specific challenges for you?
Listen, yeah, it's not easy committing capital, knowing that your success is going to be determined by hitting a resource 3 kilometers out of the ground, and all you have to go on is geophysical studies and backing your geological and geophysical teams. It's not easy, but what gives us confidence is that Kenya has already a sort of well-established and proven geothermal resource in the Olkaria area, which is actually where we're drilling. So we have a high level of confidence that within that area there is definitely steam. Now, what you're never exactly sure is exactly where it is. But for us as investors in this region, we've been here since 1967, for us this is a long-term investment plan. And we are not looking at this as sort of a short-term one project exercise. I mean, should we find resources, our intention is to build hundreds of megawatts to the extent that the resource supports it. That said, there are ways to mitigate your exploration risk. For example, we have pioneered an exploration risk insurance policy from Muriuki that covers us to the extent that we drill dry wells. And that is what gave us confidence as investors to take that naked risk on funding the exploration risk ourselves.
That's right. There's, besides these very large generation projects, there's been a lot of development around mini-grids and off-grid projects. Is that a scope that you would go into?
For us, the answer is no. The reason is that we are like to develop projects of scale that will make a meaningful impact to the economy at large. So that said, we have a minimum threshold of project which we would consider economically viable for us to pursue. Now, in the long term, we actually don't think that the sort of the mini-grid technology system is sustainable at scale in the long term. The reason being that the government is placing a lot of energy and resources in expanding rural electrification. And as that progresses over the next 10, 20 years, there's justification for many off-grid systems will reduce. But within that period, if you're still selling power into the grid, they will still need your power as long as you're cheap baseload generation, which is what our focus is. We're not particularly interested in intermittent renewable sources because they just don't make sense from an economic baseload perspective, which is the focus. Now, granted, there are those areas within the country, let's say in the far north, which will be difficult to reach with the grid because the cost of building transmission infrastructure wouldn't be justified or supported by the market or the population that exists. And yes, those do present some sort of business case for a mini-grid, but again, it's of small scale. And it's not something that we would consider a priority for ourselves given the mandate that, and the role we want to play in this local economy.
So you do see that mini-grids and off-grid is something that is necessary right now in order to reach those rural and far-reaching areas. So just lastly, where do you see the energy sector in terms of generation progressing in the next 5 years?
I think there's going to be a slowdown in new generation projects coming on stream. The last couple of years have seen a big impetus led by the government to improve generation activities, which has borne a lot of fruit. Now, the biggest challenge we have right now is that the economy is on the demand side. Because we've got all these projects coming on stream, which hopefully will reduce the average cost of power, but they're all on take-or-pay contracts. So if the demand doesn't come online at the same time, it may actually serve to increase the cost of power, because excess power people still have to pay for them. So until a solution is found for large-scale demand to come on the grid, and now that has wider issues to be considered, because those are heavy industries and the likes, which probably don't even exist at the moment. So those investors have to be attracted into the economy. It will take some time. So I would expect to see a slowdown in activity in the medium term, but in the long term, I think the fundamentals of demand are robust. That's in sort of a longer term planning horizon, about 10 years.
So East Africa can look forward to an increase in capacity and therefore an increase in the economics around business development and people being able to connect to the grid eventually in the long term.
Correct, in the long term.
Thank you so much, Job. This is ESI Africa coming to you from the East African Power Convention in Nairobi. Thank you for listening.